For a lot of people, rail fanning is just about the catches that they see. For some, it's about the journey that it takes to see those catches and the memories that will stay with you for the rest of your life. Now, how did I end up in Scranton, Pennsylvania on a random Tuesday morning? Well, let me explain. On Tuesday, June 30th, 2026, I set out to Scranton, Pennsylvania in hopes of catching Union Pacific 4014, better known by most rail fans as the Big Boy. 4014 was currently making its first ever coast-to-coast tour for America's semi-quincentennial. Now, we'd planned out a 3-day rail fanning adventure centered around chasing 4014 and Reading Blue Mountain and Northern 2102, which would also be out for the occasion. The plan was as follows. Day 1, check out Scranton and Steamtown, as well as seeing 4014 and 4012 on display next to each other. Day 2, chase 4014 and 2102 along the Reading Blue Mountain and Northern. And Day 3, see 4014 in a Reading Blue Mountain excursion at one stop before heading home. We truly had quite the adventure in front of us. Back in Scranton, we found ourselves walking through a huge department store and a mall all to get to 4014. And after 3.5 hours of driving, we had made it. To get from the Steamtown Mall to Steamtown itself, you have to walk over this huge pedestrian bridge that goes by some of the museum's deadline equipment. In the distance, we could spot Alco's C425 number 2423, which operates for the Delaware-Lackawanna Railroad, and even further, UP 1616. Some of the equipment on these storage tracks were old wooden cars, which were actually very interesting to see despite the condition they were in. To the left of them were some Union Pacific office cars that were there for the tour. And after checking out some of the things that were visible on the bridge, we could see in the distance the Union Pacific 4014, the world's largest steam locomotive, and frankly, the largest train ever. As we got closer, we got a better look at UP 1776, Norfolk Southern 1776, and UP 1616, as well as some of the executive cars. As we got up close to the trio of locomotives, they began to move as they were doing some switching operations to assemble the train for tomorrow's run down to Jim Thorpe. And just to the left of me was Union Pacific 4014, the largest train on the planet Earth. It was completely unreal to see, to be honest. This thing was massive. The name Big Boy is an understatement. Just then, the trio of diesels came shoving back with the executive train to go pick up some more cars.
That's it. The biggest event this park has had.
After seeing the diesels head through, we decided to cross over the crossing to get a better look at Big Boy. Now, what's better than one Big Boy? Two Big Boys. That's right, because along with 4014, Union Pacific number 4012 is also there because it currently resides at the Steamtown Museum. Now, here's some history on Union Pacific 4014. It was built in November of 1941 by the American Locomotive Company, or simply ALCO, in Schenectady, New York. 4014 is a 4884 locomotive, meaning that it is a 4-wheel leading truck, 2 sets of 8 driving wheels, and a 4-wheel trailing truck behind. After 20 years of service for the Union Pacific, 4014 was retired on December 7, 1961. Soon after, 4014 was donated to the Rail Giants Train Museum in Sonoma, California. After half a century of sitting, 4014 was reacquired by Union Pacific in 2013 for its Steam Heritage program, and it finally moved under its own power in 2019. And that's where we're at today. Back in Scranton, I was gifted with the lovely sight of 2 big boys next to each other, the first time that this has happened since 1961 when the locomotives were actually in service. Steamtown was offering cab tours of Big Boy number 4012, but since it was burning hot that day and the line stretched around the corner of the museum, we decided not to get on. As we marveled at the 2 big boys, the trio of diesels came back to assemble more of the train. We decided to get some looks of Reading T1 number 2124, which was located towards the north end of the museum. Now we would be seeing another T1 in operation the next day, that being Reading Blue Mountain and Northern number 2102, which would be running an excursion from Nesquehoning to Pittston. After getting one last look at the trio of diesels and the 2 big boys, we decided to head into downtown Scranton to get a bite to eat. It was extremely hot that day, so food and water was definitely a necessity. About an hour later, we found ourselves back at Steamtown, not to marvel at 4014 again, but to actually check out the Steamtown Museum. Okay, but maybe we had to marvel at 4014 for another second. To get to the museum from the crossing, we passed by Union Pacific 4014's 2 water tenders, which trailed behind it on its journey. As we walked into the museum, the first thing we were greeted by was the awesome roundhouse and turntable, with loads of awesome locomotives on display. One of my favorite locomotives on the outside display was Nickel Plate Road number 190, which was built in 1948 by ALCO. It's crazy to think that this PA1 locomotive was built just 7 years after 4014 was. There is an operational turntable at Steamtown, but unfortunately it wasn't moving while we were there. It would be the next day to get out Baldwin Locomotive 26, which would be racing Big Boy out of Scranton. The inside portion of the museum was spectacular, with things such as a real diesel engine, a diagram of working steam locomotives, model train displays, and even a cut-in-half steam locomotive to explain how one works, which in my opinion is really cool. And probably my favorite part of the whole museum, the indoor roundhouse, where you could get a look at some of Steamtown's biggest steam locomotives up close. First up in the roundhouse was Baldwin 060 Switcher number 26, which was fired up so it could race 4014 out of Scranton the next day. This locomotive usually pulls excursions around Steamtown, so it was pretty neat seeing it tucked away in the roundhouse. Other locomotives in the roundhouse include Canadian National 282 Mikado number 3254, Canadian Pacific 462 Pacific number 2317, Delaware Lackawanna and Western 260 Mogul number 565, Nickel Plate Road 284 Berkshire locomotive number 759, and Grand Trunk Western 482 Mountain locomotive number 6039. You don't get up close with huge steam locomotives like this too often, so I'm definitely glad I had the opportunity to check out the Steamtown Museum. If you're ever in the Scranton area for whatever reason, I definitely recommend coming here. They weren't running them while we were here since it was a Tuesday morning, but usually on the weekends they run excursion trains with 060 number 26. I'll definitely have to check that out someday. We then checked out an old L&N baggage car as well as some more of the inside exhibits. The inside portion of the museum offered a lot of rich knowledge on the history of railroading, some of which I didn't even know. Union Pacific even had a little exhibit. One of the parts of this exhibit was, can you pin the big boy on where it currently resides? Now I only got 3 of these right, which is kind of concerning as a rail fan, but it's whatever. After checking out the turntable once more, we headed over to spot 4014 and 4012. Now this is probably going to be the last time in my life that I ever see 2 big boy locomotives lined up next to each other, so I'm so glad I was able to see them here, not to mention that I was going to see 4014 in action tomorrow. And we found ourselves ending the day at the Scranton Wilkes-Barre Rail Riders baseball game. It's a AAA affiliate of the Yankees. And just like that, day 1 was over. Day 2 began bright and early with us heading over to Norfolk Southern's Taylor Yard right outside of Scranton to see Big Boy on its journey from Scranton to Jim Thorpe over the Reading Blue Mountain and Northern. We got to Taylor just after 9 a.m., and it's safe to say that we were not the only rail fans here. When we got to our spot at Taylor, we were greeted by the sight of many rail fans and Reading Blue Mountain and Northern local job YJPI. YJPI runs from the Reading Blue Mountain and Northern's Pittston Yard in Pittston to Taylor Yard where it interchanges with Norfolk Southern. However, it seems we were too little too late as they soon reversed and headed back light to Pittston. Now, while we're waiting here for 4014, how about I discuss the route that it will take from Scranton to Jim Thorpe, which is where we'll be chasing it today. To begin its journey, 4014 will leave Steamtown and traverse down Norfolk Southern's Sunbury line to DuPont, which passes by Taylor Yard in the process. From there, the train will reverse, and 4014 will shove its train up the DuPont connector towards Pittston. It'll merge with the Reading Blue Mountain Northern's Lehigh division so 4014 can get into Pittston and meet Reading Blue Mountain and Northern 2102, which was currently leading excursion train NQPI from Nesquehoning to Pittston with the help of 2 SD50-2s number 5018 and 5020. After departing Pittston later that afternoon, 4014 and 2102 will both traverse the Reading Blue Mountain and Northern Lehigh division heading south towards Jim Thorpe. 4014 will end its day in Jim Thorpe while 2102 will head a little bit west towards Nesquehoning before ferrying down to Port Clinton. Back at Taylor, the crisp July morning was interrupted by the sound of a steam locomotive in the distance, none other than Union Pacific 4014. This is one of these moments in my life that I've dreamed of for years, not knowing when it's going to happen, and now it's finally here. We said goodbye to 4014 and an unfortunately timed Norfolk Southern local and headed over to our next spot, McAlpine Street in Avoca, Pennsylvania, to see Union Pacific 4014 shoving down the DuPont connector and Reading Blue Mountain and Northern 2102 on its run from Nesquehoning to Pittston. So we have arrived at McAlpine Road, and I'm planning to see 2102 here, but apparently 4014 is supposed to shove through. So let's see how this goes. Most rail fans here expected that 4014 would come shoving through first, however that was not the case. Since Big Boy had stopped at DuPont so it could shove up the DuPont connector, they decided to hold it there and let 2102 go through first. After not even 20 minutes of us waiting there, 2102 came steaming through with an awesome whistle. I really wanted to see 2102 last summer, but unfortunately the logistics wouldn't have worked out, so I'm so glad I was able to see it along with 4014. I'm definitely going to come back to the Reading Blue Mountain and Northern someday just to chase this thing around. Check out this cool catch. Wow, what a sight that was. Now, if you've been keeping up with the Big Boy Tour, then I'm sure you've heard of this. But unfortunately, at McAlpine Street, I witnessed a car accident. So there was a red car parked on the side of the road in a no parking zone, presumably a rail fanner. So next thing you know, I'm turning on the T3i because 4014 should shove around the corner any second when, kaboom, a gray car slammed into the side of the red car and did a complete 180. Now, unfortunately, there were children in the car, but thankfully everyone from the car was evacuated safely, with minor injuries. As 4014's train shoved around the curve, fire trucks and EMS of all sorts scrambled to the scene to rescue the occupants of the car. And just like that, we were back to seeing the largest steam locomotive in the world. despite the random photobomber that walked into our shot at the last second, that was absolutely awesome, especially 4014 blowing its whistle at the end. After this, we decided to retreat back to our hotel for food and water before a huge storm came. After this huge storm passed, we would head over to Mountaintop to see 4014 and 2102 going south. So obviously this rain is going to delay us a lot, so we'll see what we can do. Pretty sure Big Boy's held waiting for it, and 2102 the same. Once the rain started to die down a bit, we headed south towards Penobscot, which is where I originally wanted to see both locomotives headed south. However, when we got to Penobscot, I noticed that it was extremely packed, so we decided to settle for a cut in the trees a little north of there. And in the distance, I saw the Mountaintop deadline, with some ST50-2s and some Norfolk Southern ST40s. Here's a better look at our spot. We had a great view of both mainline tracks and some of Reading Blue Mountain and Northern's Mountaintop Yard, which unfortunately wasn't seeing any action when we were there. And after almost 2 hours of waiting, because as I said, both locomotives were held due to the crazy rain, we could finally hear 2102's whistle in the distance. Now, me and a lot of other rail fans who were chasing the two around thought that they would be racing south from Pittston. However, for whatever reason, this was not the case. I have no idea why, and if you do know, I would appreciate it if you let me know in the comments. So anyway, sit back, relax, and enjoy this very cool catch of 2102 headed south. Now, right after passing us, 2102's train came to a halt. Now, I had no idea why until I heard some more rumbling behind us and realized that 4014 was on its way. Now, after 4014's train came through, it was clear what was going on. Both locomotives were going to stop right next to each other, presumably for photos. However, the traffic was extremely brutal down there, so we just decided to drive past. Because the road that runs through Mountaintop ran right next to the tracks, I was able to get some shots of Union Pacific Unit number 1776. You will not convince me that this is a heritage unit, but this was also my first time ever seeing Union Pacific, so it was pretty cool. Then the rest of the consist up until 4014 was unfortunately blocked by some shrubs. But man, look at 4014 just stop there. Now, this is probably going to be the only time in my life that I see two steam giants like this parked next to each other, and unfortunately it was blocked, but I'm still glad I was able to see the two next to each other. And just like that, one of the greatest rail fanning days of my entire life was over. We had reached the final leg of our journey, just like how 4014 would be in a few days. On the way home from Scranton, we decided to stop in a little town called Nesquehoning, Pennsylvania to catch 4014 one more time and a little something special. Just casually parked along the side of the road was Reading Blue Mountain and Northern excursion train NQOS, which was set to run from Nesquehoning to Reading Outer Station in Reading, Pennsylvania. We decided to get a nice drive-by of NQOS before it departed. This train was running from Nesquehoning Regional Rail Station in Nesquehoning, Pennsylvania to the Reading Outer Station in Reading, Pennsylvania. This train consisted of 25 Reading Blue Mountain and Northern passenger cars, a good amount of which were on yesterday's excursion with 2102. Leading the train were Reading Blue Mountain and Northern 1776, an SD40-2, and 2026, a GP38-2, both of which were recently painted for America's 250th anniversary. So we found this pretty cool spot on the side of the road, a little bit west of Nesquehoning. In the background there, not sure you can see the right corner, there is the excursion that will presumably be following 4014 with 2026 and 1776. Soon enough, we could hear 4014's iconic whistle in the distance, and just after, we saw it pull around the bend and stop next to the excursion. The two locomotives pulled up next to each other for a 5-minute photo shoot, and after that, the excursion was ready to go and left for Reading Outer Station. To be honest, this was a pretty awesome catch. The sweetly tuned P5 of 2026 mixed with the hazy July morning goes together so well. Enjoy this awesome catch. After the excursion left the mainline track at Nesquehoning, 4014 would shove out of the siding track and proceed west right after it. To be honest, this was a pretty bittersweet catch for 2 reasons. 1, it was the last time we would see Big Boy on this trip, and 2, I may never see Big Boy again, and this might be the last time I ever see it. I'm so grateful to have gone on this 3-day adventure, and I had such a fun time. I hope it's not the last time I see 4014, but if it is, I'm just so happy to have seen it on these 3 days. 4014 began to pull forward on its way to Reading, Pennsylvania. After that, they would go to Abrams Yard in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania before going to Philadelphia the next day, ending off the 250th anniversary trip. So anyway, sit back, relax, and enjoy the last time that we saw 4014 on the trip. Thank you all so much for watching this nearly 40-minute video. I'm sorry for how long it took me to make this, but I've been absolutely busy this whole summer. Oh, and thank you all so much for 600 subscribers. I know this is technically not a 600 subscriber special because the only time I really mentioned that it was in the beginning sequence, but just thank you. It's so crazy to think that 600 of you subscribed to this random little channel on YouTube called The Freight Escape. Most of all, I want to thank my dad, who took 3 days out of his life to take me to Pennsylvania to chase a silly little train. Thank you so much, Dad. Now that this monstrosity of a video is out, be prepared for some more Long Island rail fanning action. I've been catching a lot of pretty cool stuff lately, so definitely stay tuned. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. See ya!